OAuth is probably the most popular way for cross-service authorization. Hello and welcome to Code with Sar. I'm Sar. How are you doing? In today's video, I'm going to share with you about my progress on the investigation. Today's topic is about OAuth. That is one piece of the fundamental to make the application work. I would first share with you what I learned about how OAuth works on the paper. Then I'll trigger a flow manually, gain an access token from the resource provider, and use that piece of token to access the resource owner's OneDrive. I hope by the end of the video, we all have better understanding about what OAuth 2 is. Let's get started. Let's quickly go over our goal. We're creating a desktop app, a phone app, and a web app to store the numbers. And we're going to leverage the existing data service to do the syncing. For more details, please review the quick blueprint video. I want to do some investigation around the data storage first because there are a lot of unknown for me. A full disclosure, I'm currently working at Microsoft as a senior developer, but this project has nothing to do with my job. My tech choice will be biased, and I know about that. And I mention this because I wish you to be aware of that as well. I'm going to pick OneDrive because that's the one that I'm familiar with. The way of doing things should be very similar for other services. Okay, let's start today's investigation. What I want to understand is how my app, the CodeNameK, to access OneDrive. This is specifically for the desktop app and the mobile app. By my understanding at this moment, the web app is a little bit different. I'm probably going to make another video for it. I'll take the desktop app as an example. It seems like it's very reachable with an OAuth flow. And here's what I learned. An OAuth flow involves several parties. Some of them are on the client side, while the other parties are on the internet. In our case, the user is on the client side, and the user is also a resource owner. This is easy to understand. Let's say I created a live account, CodeNameK testuser@hotmail.com. Microsoft hosts OneDrive, but I am still the owner for the OneDrive because I own the account. Every resource belongs to me. A second important part is the client. In our case, it's the CodeNameK application that we're going to build. Then there is the resource server, like OneDrive in our case. There are other parties, like the Authorization server or the Authentication server, along with the service. I'm not going to distinguish it, just for the simplicity. To us, it is OneDrive. Now, here's the challenge. The user owns the Hotmail account. By account, I actually means a credential, that is a username and password, and inherently got the OneDrive. The client or the app actually don't have anything. So how does OneDrive know to allow access from CodeNameK? This is what I learned. Firstly, the application developer needs to register an app with the resource provider, and that will give back the client ID to identify that specific application. When the user starts the application will request an authorization to access the resource of OneDrive from the user. There are several ways to do that. For desktop applications, one common way is to bring up a browser and send the user to the authorization endpoint. There are several pieces of important information that we send in the URL, and they are the client ID for this app, what kind of resource this app wants to access, and the permission this app requests. By the way, in some places, target resource and the permissions would be combined and called a scope. Now, this is essentially to tell the authorization server, hey, I am this app by client ID that I registered with you ahead of time. I want to access the current user's OneDrive with, let's say, read and write permission. Okay? So how does OneDrive respond? OneDrive would ask, who's the current user? Show me your credential. And that's the response to the browser request from the app. Now it's the user's responsibility to establish an identity, and this is the authentication part. The user needs to prove to the OneDrive service, hey, I am who I am, by providing the username and password. Once that's done, the OneDrive would ask the user, hey, now I know who you are. Do you want this app to access your OneDrive? It asks for these permissions. And if the user says yes, as I'm going to do right now, OneDrive will either give back an access token or a code that could be used to exchange for an access token. And then the app could use the access token to access the OneDrive resource. The app without knowing the username and password, is now authorized to access the user's OneDrive. That's the flow and the theory. Now that we figured things out on the paper, it is time for us to do some proof of concept. I'm always amazed how big the gap could be in between knowing it on paper versus implement it. This is usually the step to help me gain some further understanding. It also helps spot the caveats if there's any. So the first thing that I would do when it comes to something new is to find out the official documentation and scan it. When I search the OneDrive authentication, I'm landed on this page. And here's our first caveat, that Microsoft GraphAPI is recommended over the OneDrive API. Okay, let's follow the link. Let's go over this document really quick. The first step on the documentation is still talking about register your app, which is great. That should give us back the client ID or app ID. It lists the authentication scopes. Those are the possible options for the app to request permission for during the authorization. And then I saw the supported flows. That is great. With this information, I could probably manually craft an authentication flow. And if it is doable manually, it is definitely doable by programming. Let's get started by registering an app and get the client ID. Once I follow the link to register an application on the documentation, I need to sign in with my dev account. Now I want to be very clear, this is me as a dev, not the CodeNameK test user, alright? As you can see, I already have 2 applications registered before, and I'm going to create another just for the demo purpose. The UI might change over time, but the basic steps should be there. Let me start by click this new registration button. For an application, we're going to fill in the display name, the supported account types, as well as the redirect URI. The name will be displayed to the end user, so it's probably a good idea to pick a descriptive name. For supported account types, I'm picking the one that supports organizational user as well as personal users. Now, the redirect URI, although it is optional, I'm going to fill in a local host address, and I'll explain why soon. Click the register button, and here we go. A new app has been registered. Here on this overview page, there are several information that is critical. The first one is this app ID or client ID that we've been mentioned again and again. The second one is this endpoints button. It lists all the live endpoints. There are several types of endpoints like authorization endpoint, token endpoint. It's okay if they aren't to make sense now. You will know what you are looking for when you follow a documentation. But this is actually another spot with caveats. These endpoints changes over time. The documentations might lag behind. If we follow the documentation, try to hit the endpoint and it didn't behave what we expected, this would be a spot to check if something changed. Okay, now we got the client ID, let's proceed forward. The next step is to understand what kind of authentication scopes could be used. The CodeNameK app need to be able to read and write files. So for me, the choice might be files.read-write. We probably do not need offline access, but the comment does tell us that it is possible to have multiple scopes. Okay, scope happily decided. Now it's time for us to understand the flow. If we got everything correct, the flow will eventually give us an access token, and the access token will allow us to access the target resource. Let's try it out. According to the documentation, the first step for us to do is send a request to the authorization endpoint. There are 4 parameters that are needed. Client ID, we have one. Scope, we just chose one. Response type, need to be hard-coded to token because this is the token flow. And the redirect URI. That is used for telling the OneDrive, the resource provider, when the authorization succeeded, where to give the access token to. Okay, that's complex. Let's see it in action, and hopefully it will be easier that way. Now imagine CodeNameK need to access the user's OneDrive. It will start a browser and type in this. Oh, I am typing this now because I don't have the code for CodeNameK, not yet. So I'm pretending I am the code. And I'm filling up parameters according to the documentation. Say client ID. I'm going to copy the scope so that I don't make a typo or something like that. Hey, app doesn't make typo. Response type would be hard-coded to token. And the redirect URL is localhost/auth. And that is to say, if the user signed in successfully, please give the token to localhost/auth. And the OneDrive is giving me the sign-in page again. Now, this me is the resource owner. I need to sign in so that OneDrive knows I am the owner for the OneDrive. So I'll fill it up with the codename test user account. And we see an error message already. Empty response. Let's see, unsupported the response type. And the description says the response type is not supported. Okay, after handling for a while, I think I find out what was missing. There are actually settings for the registered app. It lies in this authentication blade. This is properly used as a pre-negotiation between the application and the resource provider that these are the flows that I'm going to use. And to use a token flow, I believe this checkbox needs to be checked. Now let's go back and try it again. To save time, I'll put the URL in the clipboard ahead of time. Okay, this is beyond the failure point. Now the response seems like still an error, but hey, pay attention to the URL. It has been redirected to the redirect URL, which is a localhost/auth, and it is giving the access token followed by the pound sign, shop sign, whatever. Now let me copy out to the URL and extract the access token. The token is URL encoded, so we will need to decode it before use, and it will only live for 10 minutes. Without further ado, let's spin up Postman and try to hit the OneDrive. So I'm going to do that twice. The first time without the bearer token, and I'm going to get the full one, of course. Now let me paste in the token and run it again. And it succeeded. It lists the children of the root. If you pay attention to the URL that I'm using, this is a graph endpoint rather than the OneDrive endpoint. And the API like v1, me, drive, root, children, this comes down from the official documentation of the GraphAPI. This is not the point for this video, but I'll put a link to the description. Thanks for watching. During this investigation, I understand more about the user or the resource owner in an OAuth flow, as well as what is a client and what is the resource provider. I have better understanding of what a token flow is, and I also get more confidence that the storage story for Project K is going to be a success. I actually made more progress for investigation than what I can show you in this video. And stay tuned, next time we're going to talk about SDKs. If you liked it, press the like button and subscribe. Keep coding, keep improving. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.